stood in front of the massive doors and took a deep breath. Behind those doors was the Galactic Council chamber. Today was the biggest day of his career. Today was the biggest day for all of humanity, really. After 200 years of space travel, humans were finally getting a seat at the table. The doors opened slowly, walked inside and tried not to look nervous. The chamber was huge. It was circular, with seats arranged in a giant ring. Each seat belonged to a different species from across the galaxy. And today, one of those seats would be filled by a human for the very first time. Lee walked beside him. She was his assistant and she carried a tablet with all their important documents. "Remember," she whispered, "we're here to observe today. Don't make any bold statements. Just smile and be polite." I know," whispered back. He had been practicing his introduction speech for weeks. As they walked to the human section, noticed something immediately. It was cold, very cold. He could see his breath forming small clouds in the air. He wore his best formal suit, but he wished he had brought a jacket. The other delegates were already seated. Most of them were. They were the most powerful species in the council. They looked like large lizards that walked on two legs. They had scales that shimmered in shades of green and blue. Their eyes were sharp and intelligent, and right now many of those eyes were watching. At the center of the chamber sat High Chancellor. He was the leader of the Empire and the head of the Galactic Council. He was enormous, even for a... His scales were deep emerald green, and he wore robes that showed his high rank. He watched with an expression that was hard to read. "Ah," the human delegate said. His voice was deep and seemed to echo in the chamber. "Welcome to the Galactic Council. Please take your seat." Bowed respectfully. "Thank you, High Chancellor. It is an honor to be here." He walked to the designated human seat. It looked impressive. The seat was made of some kind of biometal that seemed to shift colors slightly. It had armrests covered in soft material, and the back of the chair was tall and dignified. A small nameplate on the armrest read, "Human Delegate," in multiple languages. Took her position in a smaller seat just behind him, in the assistants section. She gave an encouraging nod. Sat down in the chair. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The seat was actually quite comfortable. It seemed to mold slightly to his body shape. Thought that was clever technology. Then he noticed the seat was warming up. That was nice, actually. The room was so cold that a warm seat felt wonderful. But the seat kept getting warmer and warmer. Within 30 seconds, the seat was uncomfortably hot. Shifted in his position, trying to find a cooler spot. But the entire seat was heating up like an oven. Sweat began to form on his forehead. "Are you well, Delegate?" asked. The other council members were starting to stare. "Yes, I'm fine," said quickly, "just adjusting." But he wasn't fine. The seat was now burning hot. He could feel the heat through his suit pants. The armrests were too hot to touch comfortably. Gripped them anyway, trying to look calm and professional. Then something strange happened. The temperature in the entire chamber began to change. Felt it immediately. The cold air around him was getting warmer, much warmer. Within a minute, the freezing room had become pleasantly warm. Within 2 minutes, it was getting hot. The delegates began to shift in their seats. They looked uncomfortable. Some of them pulled at their robes. Others fanned themselves with their hands. "What is happening?" demanded. He touched a control panel on his armrest. "Why is the environmental system malfunctioning?" A technician rushed into the chamber from a side door. "High Chancellor, the human delegate seat is overloading the system. The sensors are registering unprecedented heat levels." Tried to stand up, but quickly put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't," she whispered urgently. "It might make things worse if you get up during the session." The chamber was getting hotter by the second. The delegates were clearly suffering. They were cold-blooded creatures and suddenly understood the problem. The seats were designed to keep them comfortable by monitoring their body temperature. But human body temperature was much higher than temperature. The seat thought was freezing and was desperately trying to warm him up. In the process, it was heating the entire chamber. Stood up from his seat. His scales had changed color slightly, looking less vibrant. He was breathing heavily. All around the chamber, delegates were slumping in their chairs. Some of them were fanning themselves desperately. A few looked like they might pass out. "This session is adjourned," announced. His voice was strained. "We will reconvene when the environmental systems are repaired." The other species in the chamber looked confused. A tall, bird-like creature from the delegation tilted its head curiously. A delegate from the aquatic species seemed completely unbothered by the temperature change, but they were clearly in distress. Finally stood up from the seat. The moment he did, alarms started blaring throughout the chamber. Red lights flashed on the walls. The technician was typing frantically on a handheld device. "I'm so sorry," said loudly addressing. "I didn't mean to cause any problems. I apologize for disrupting the session." Stared at him. The High Chancellor's eyes were cold, and not just because he was a reptile. "The human delegation will be contacted about proper protocols," he said stiffly. "We clearly underestimated the complications of accommodating your species." The way he said "your species" made it sound like an insult. Quickly guided toward the exit. As they left the chamber, could hear the other delegates talking among themselves. Some sounded amused, others sounded concerned. The just sounded angry. Outside the chamber, slumped against a wall. "That was a disaster." "That was definitely not ideal," agreed. She was trying to sound diplomatic, but even she looked worried. "Humanity's first day on the Galactic Council, and we literally overheated the entire session." Put his head in his hands. "The High Chancellor looked like he wanted to throw me out an airlock." "Well," said, pulling up information on her tablet, "according to these readings, the station's entire environmental system is calibrated for biology. The chamber is normally kept at 78 degrees. That explains why I was freezing," muttered. "And why the seat tried to compensate," continued. "Human body temperature is 98.6 degrees. The seat must have thought you were dying of hypothermia." Looked at her. "So what do we do now?" Before could answer, a message appeared on her tablet. She read it and winced. "We've been summoned to meet with the station's chief engineer, unnamed, tomorrow morning." "Great," said. "I'm sure that will go well." They walked back toward their quarters in silence. Around them, the station continued its normal operations. Aliens of various species went about their business. None of them seemed to know about the disaster that had just happened in the council chamber. But knew, and he knew that they would not forget this embarrassment anytime soon. Humanity had finally earned a seat at the most important table in the galaxy, and on the very first day, that seat had nearly caused an environmental catastrophe. As they reached their quarters, looked at, "Do you think they'll revoke our council membership?" Shook her head. "No, but I think our next few months here are going to be very, very complicated." She was right, but neither of them could have guessed just how much one overheated chair would change the entire Galactic Council forever. The next morning and arrived at the engineering section of the station. The corridors here were different from the diplomatic areas. Everything was functional and plain. Pipes ran along the ceilings. The walls were bare metal, and it was still very, very cold. Was waiting for them in his office. He was an engineer, smaller than but still impressive. His scales were a darker blue-green, and his eyes seemed to examine everything with precise calculation. He did not look happy to see them. "Sit," said, pointing to two chairs across from his desk. And sat down carefully. These chairs, thankfully, did not seem to be. Pulled up a holographic display between them. It showed the council chamber and various technical readings. "Do you understand what you did yesterday?" he asked. His voice was cold and precise. "The seat malfunctioned," began. "No," interrupted. "The seat functioned exactly as designed. You are the malfunction." bristled at that. That's not fair, we didn't know. Your ignorance does not change the facts, continued. He manipulated the hologram, showing temperature graphs. Body temperature ranges from 75 to 80 degrees. The seats are designed to maintain optimal comfort for council delegates. When you sat in that chair, your body temperature of 98 degrees caused a cascade failure in the system. Studied the graphs. I see. The seat tried to match my temperature. Worse, said. It detected that you were much hotter than expected and assumed you were experiencing a dangerous fever. It triggered emergency heating protocols throughout the chamber. It was trying to save your life by warming the environment. He paused. Instead, it nearly killed everyone in the room. The weight of that statement hung in the air. We're truly sorry, said. What can we do to fix this? Pulled up another display. It showed what looked like a full-body suit. You will wear this. It is a thermal suppression suit. It will lower your external body temperature to acceptable levels. This is not optional. High Chancellor has mandated that all humans on this station must wear thermal regulation if they wish to participate in council activities. Looked at the suit. It looked uncomfortable and bulky. Is there another solution, perhaps adjusting the seats themselves? His eyes narrowed. You suggest we modify technology that has served the council perfectly for 3 centuries, because one species cannot adapt. I'm just asking if there are alternatives, said carefully. There are not, said firmly. Engineering is the foundation of this station. We designed the environmental systems. We built the council chamber. We maintain everything here. The solution is simple. Humans must adapt. Before could respond, there was a knock at the door. A human man entered. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, and wore an engineer's uniform. He carried a toolkit and had grease on his hands. Sorry to interrupt, the man said. I'm Jin Park, human engineering consultant. I was told to report here. Looked annoyed. Yes, the council has mandated that a human engineer review our systems. A waste of time, in my opinion. Jin seemed unbothered by the rudeness. He smiled politely. I'm just here to help. Let me take a look at the seat specifications. Reluctantly shared the technical data with Jin's. Jin studied it for several minutes while everyone waited in silence. Finally, Jin looked up. I see the problem. The seats use a closed-loop thermal regulation system. They're designed for a very narrow temperature range. When they encounter something outside that range, they overcompensate. Obviously, said with disdain. But here's the thing, Jin continued. The entire station is calibrated the same way, not just the council chamber. Everything here assumes all occupants will have level body temperatures. The heating systems, the cooling systems, even the water temperature in the hygiene facilities. Thought about the shower he had taken that morning. The water had been barely lukewarm at its hottest setting. He had assumed it was broken. The station is designed for, said. This is a station. Actually, Jin said, pulling up station records. According to the council charter, this is a multi-species station. There are delegates and staff from 23 different species living here. All of whom have adapted to our standards, replied. Jin nodded thoughtfully. May I ask a question? What's the average ambient temperature in this office right now? Check the panel, 76 degrees. And you're comfortable? Of course. Jin turned to a small alien creature that was working at a nearby console. It looked like a cross between a bird and a small dinosaur, covered in colorful feathers. Excuse me, are you? The creature looked up and chirped affirmatively. Are you comfortable at 76 degrees? Jin asked. The shook its head. It typed something on a translator device. The device spoke in a flat, mechanical voice. I am cold, always cold, but we adapt. We wear heating garments. Jin walked to a water station and checked the temperature. This water is calibrated for drinking temperature, right? Around 78 degrees. Correct, said impatiently. What is your point? My point, Jin said, is that maybe the station isn't as perfect as you think. If other species have to constantly wear extra equipment just to be comfortable, that's not adaptation. That's accommodation of a design flaw. Scales seemed to darken. You dare to call engineering flawed? I'm saying it's optimized for one species, Jin replied calmly, which is fine for a only station, but this is supposed to be a galactic station. A simple retrofit could add adjustable climate zones. Each species could have their areas set to comfortable levels. Stood up? Absolutely not. Do you have any idea how much that would cost? How complex it would be? The energy requirements alone would be offset by increased efficiency, Jin interrupted. Cold-blooded species use less energy in cold environments, yes, but warm-blooded species use more energy staying warm in cold environments. If you let everyone work at their optimal temperature, overall energy consumption would actually decrease. Watched this exchange with growing interest. Jin was arguing with using pure engineering logic and was clearly struggling to find a counterargument. Even if your calculations are correct, finally said, such a retrofit would take months, perhaps years, and the council would never approve the expense. Then I guess humans will have to wear those thermal suits, Jin said with a shrug. Though I should mention, we've got 47 humans arriving next week for various support positions. Security staff, medical personnel, technical consultants. They'll all need suits. His eyes widened slightly. 47. That's just the first wave, added. Humanity takes our council seats seriously. We're sending qualified people to work in every department. Sat back down. He looked at his holographic displays again, probably calculating something. 47 thermal suits would cost, and the maintenance, and if they malfunction. He seemed to be talking to himself now. There was a sudden commotion in the corridor outside. They heard shouting and the sound of alarms, jumped up and ran to the door. The others followed. Down the corridor, emergency lights were flashing. A group of technicians were gathered around a wall panel that was smoking slightly. And standing nearby, looking confused and apologetic, was a large human man in a security uniform. What happened? Demanded. One of the technicians replied in rapid. His translator device converted it to English. The human guard was on patrol. He stood near the environmental control panel for approximately 10 minutes. His body heat caused the backup cooling system to activate. The sudden temperature change created condensation in the circuits, minor electrical failure. The human guard stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered with a nameplate that read BOCHOI. I'm really sorry, Bo said. I was just standing guard like I was supposed to. I didn't touch anything. Looked at Bo, then at Jin, then at. His scales had lost some of their vibrant color. This is going to be a problem, he said quietly. Jin nodded. Yes, it is, unless. Unless what? Asked, though he sounded like he already knew the answer. Unless we retrofit the station with proper multi-species climate controls, Jin finished. It's either that, or humans can't work here. And I don't think High Chancellor wants to tell the Galactic Council that humans are banned from the station, because engineering can't handle their body temperature. Was silent for a long moment. Around them, more technicians arrived to fix the smoking panel. Bo stood to the side looking embarrassed. Finally spoke, I will need to consult with my superiors and with the High Chancellor, but, he paused, clearly struggling with what he was about to say, but you may be correct, a retrofit may be necessary. Jin smiled. I'd be happy to help with the design specifications. Looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. I am sure you would. As they walked back to their quarters later, turned to, do you think we'll actually do it? The retrofit. Smiled. He doesn't have a choice. More humans are coming, and apparently we're thermal hazards just by existing. Laughed. We came here to join the galactic community. Instead, We're accidentally breaking everything just by standing near it. Welcome to human diplomacy, said, where even sitting in a chair becomes an international incident. Behind them, Jin was already on his, sketching out preliminary designs for a new climate control system. And in the engineering section, was having a very uncomfortable conversation with High Chancellor about the future of the station. The age of only optimization was ending, and it had ended not because of politics or war, but because humans were simply too warm. 3 weeks after the chair incident, High Chancellor called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. This time was prepared. He wore a light thermal regulation vest under his suit. It kept his external temperature lower without being too uncomfortable. Jin had designed it himself, working around the clock to create something less bulky than its original design. The council chamber was still cold, but not as cold as before. Small adjustments had been made to allow for temporary human accommodation, though had made it clear these were not permanent solutions. Took his seat carefully. The system had been disabled in the human delegate chair. Now it was just a regular chair which found perfectly acceptable. Sat behind him, her tablet ready. Stood at the center of the chamber. He looked stern, which was his normal expression, but thought he detected something else. Embarrassment, maybe, or anger. Distinguished delegates began. We are here to discuss a matter of station infrastructure, specifically the environmental systems and their compatibility with newer council members. A few delegates glanced at. He kept his expression neutral. As you all know, continued, there have been several incidents involving human personnel and station systems. While these incidents were unintentional, they have exposed certain limitations in our current infrastructure. A delegate name stood up. He was older than his scales pale with age. High Chancellor, with respect, the problem is not our infrastructure. The problem is that humans are thermally incompatible with civilized standards. Perhaps their council membership was premature. Felt his face grow hot but put a gentle hand on his shoulder. Don't react, her touch said. Let them talk. Before could respond, another voice spoke up. It was a delegate named Pika. She was small, covered in bright orange and blue feathers, and had to use a platform to reach her chair's controls. Thermally incompatible with civilized standards. Pika's translator device made her chirping voice sound almost sarcastic. Interesting phrase. Should I assume that my people are also uncivilized? We maintain body temperatures of 105 degrees, higher than humans. Looked flustered. That is different, they have adapted. We wear heated clothing at all times, Pika interrupted, even in our own quarters, because this station is maintained at temperatures comfortable for not for us. A deep, gurgling voice joined the conversation. It came from the section. The delegate was a massive creature that looked like a cross between a whale and an octopus. It lived in a specialized tank filled with water. They also find the station uncomfortable, the translator rendered its sounds. Our water tanks must be specially heated. The station's default water temperature is far too cold for our biology. We have adapted, as Delegate Pika said, but adaptation is not the same as comfort. More delegates began speaking up. The mention that they needed heating lamps in their quarters. A rock-like species called the said they actually found the station too warm and had to use constant cooling systems. Raised his hands for silence. I understand that all species have different needs. This is why we have accommodation systems in place. Accommodations that we must pay for ourselves, Pika said. My people spend 15% of our council stipend on thermal garments and heating equipment. Is that fair? A young delegate stood up, recognized him from previous sessions. His name was, and he was part of the diplomatic corps. He was younger than most of the other, his scales still bright and vibrant. High Chancellor, if I may speak, said. Nodded, though he looked wary. Took a breath. I have been reviewing historical records. When this station was built 300 years ago, the Empire was the dominant power in the Council. We designed the station to our specifications. This made sense at the time, but the Council has grown. We now have 23 member species, yet the station still operates as if only live here. We are discussing infrastructure, said sharply, not politics. But it is political, replied. Infrastructure decisions are always political. We chose to build a station that advantages our species. Cold temperatures make most warm-blooded species sluggish. They think more slowly. They are less effective in negotiations. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates from various species began shouting at once. Some demanded to know if was accusing the of deliberate manipulation. Others were shouting at each other. His voice boomed over the chaos. Order! This council will maintain order. Slowly the chamber quieted, but could feel the tension in the air. Something had shifted. A truth had been spoken that everyone had privately known but never acknowledged. Fixed with a hard stare, Delegate, you make a serious accusation. I make an observation, said calmly. I have been reading reports from 3 centuries of negotiations. Consistently, warm-blooded species make more concessions during extended negotiations than they do during short sessions. The cold affects their judgment over time. I do not believe this was a conscious conspiracy, but I believe our ancestors designed this station knowing it would give us an advantage. Watched this exchange with fascination. Was risking his political career to speak this truth, and judging by the expressions of the other delegates, many of them were having the same realization. A new voice joined the conversation. Dr. Sun Yang stood from the Human Observers section. She was one of the human experts sent to help with the station issues. High Chancellor, may I share some research? Sun asked. Look tired, proceed. Sun pulled up a holographic display. It showed thermal ranges for all 23 council species. I have been studying the body temperature ranges of all species on this station. The range is 75 to 80 degrees. The galactic average, however, is 92 degrees. She highlighted the graph. 18 of the 23 species on this council have optimal temperatures above 85 degrees. Only 3 species, including the, prefer temperatures below 80 degrees. In other words, the station is currently optimized for the minority, not the majority. This is absurd, said. We cannot change 3 centuries of infrastructure because other stations have multi-species climate zones, Sun interrupted. The commercial stations, for example, have modular environmental systems. Different sections can maintain different temperatures. It is not revolutionary technology. It is simply inclusive design. Was silent for a long moment. Could see the High Chancellor thinking, calculating. This was clearly not how had expected this session to go. Finally spoke. The Council will take a recess. We will reconvene in 2 hours to discuss potential infrastructure modifications. As the delegates filed out, approached, the young was gathering his materials and he looked nervous. That was brave, said. Looked at him with those sharp eyes. Or foolish. Many of my people will see this as betrayal. You spoke the truth, added. That's never betrayal. Truth can be uncomfortable, said. He paused, then added, I have watched your species since you arrived. You humans are strange. You did not come here demanding we change. You simply existed, and your existence revealed problems that were always there. That is interesting. Smiled. We're good at being unintentionally disruptive. Perhaps that is what the Council needs, said thoughtfully. Disruption. When the Council reconvened, looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 hours, but his voice was steady. This Council will vote on a proposal, announced. We will retrofit this station with modular climate control. Each section will be adjustable for species-specific comfort. The cost will be shared by all Council members. Construction will begin immediately and is expected to take 6 months. I object, stood up. This is a waste of resources. The vote will proceed, said firmly. The vote was not even close. 18 species voted in favor. Only 3 voted against, all of them worlds. The proposal passed easily. As the session ended, Kaut's eye, the High Chancellor looked at him for a long moment. There was no warmth in that gaze, but there was something else. Respect, maybe, or at least acknowledgement. Outside the chamber, Jin was waiting with Bo. They had been watching the session on a monitor. "We won?" Jin asked. "We won," confirmed. "We didn't win," corrected. "Everyone won, that's the point." Bo grinned. "So I can stop apologizing for overheating door panels." "In 6 months, yes," Jin laughed. "Until then, try to stand away from sensitive equipment." As they walked through the station, noticed something. Other delegates were nodding to him in the corridors, not with hostility but with something like gratitude. They had all been cold for decades, and now, finally, that would change. Caught up with them in the corridor, delegate a moment. Stopped, of course. I wanted to say, hesitated. Thank you for sitting in that chair, for being too warm. You forced us to confront a truth we had been ignoring. I was just sitting down, said with a smile. Sometimes that is enough, replied. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply being yourself. As walked away, turned to. Did we just accidentally start a political movement? I think we did, said, by sitting in a chair. Humanity, laughed, making history one overheated seat at a time. Behind them, the station continued its daily operations, but something fundamental had changed. The age of dominance was ending, not because of war or revolution, but because one human had been too warm for a chair. And in that small moment, the entire galaxy had realized that comfort should be universal, not exclusive. The thermal reformation had begun. The retrofitting of the Galactic Council station was the largest construction project in recent memory. For the next 3 months, entire sections of the station were closed for renovation. Workers from multiple species crawled through maintenance tunnels, installed new systems, and tested countless configurations. Jin Park was in his element. He worked with engineering teams from across the galaxy, coordinating the massive project. His small office had become a command center, covered in holographic blueprints and status reports. Visited him one afternoon to find Jin arguing with, again. They seemed to argue almost daily now, but it was different than before. There was respect in their disagreements now. The sections need heating elements every 3 meters, Jin was saying, pointing at a schematic. Not every 5 meters like you proposed. Every 3 meters is excessive, replied. The cost is necessary, Jin interrupted. They have been cold for 300 years. We're not going to cheap out now. Made a sound that might have been a sigh. Very well, every 3 meters, but the water systems will need to be more efficient to compensate. We cannot exceed the energy budget. Already working on it, Jin said, pulling up another schematic. I've got a recycling system that should reduce their heating needs by 30%. Watched them work together. A few months ago, had called humans a malfunction. Now he and Jin were designing systems together like they had been partners for years. How's the progress? Asked. Both engineers looked up, seemingly surprised to see him. Ahead of schedule in some areas, behind in others, Jin said. The sections are the most complex. We need to make sure they can stay cool while adjacent sections are warm. The thermal barriers are tricky. It would be simpler if everyone just adapted to one temperature, muttered, but his heart wasn't in it. Even he didn't believe that anymore. Any major problems? Asked. Jin and exchanged a look. That was never a good sign. There is one issue, Jin said carefully. We discovered something during the renovation, something in the old systems. Pulled up a data file. We found logs from the original station construction, environmental specifications, meeting notes. The designers were very thorough. And prompted. And they explicitly chose cold temperatures for a strategic advantage, said. His scales had dulled slightly, a sign of shame in body language. Delegate was correct. It was intentional. Jin pointed to a particular document. This is from a strategy meeting 300 years ago. They calculated that warm-blooded species would be 15% less effective in negotiations after 4 hours in cold conditions. They built that into the design of the council chamber on purpose. Felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. So it really was a conspiracy. Not a conspiracy, said quietly. A strategy, and it was effective. For centuries, the dominated council politics, not because we were smarter or more diplomatic, because everyone else was literally too cold to think clearly. What are you going to do with this information? Asked. Looked at the documents for a long time. I am going to give them to High Chancellor, and I am going to recommend he share them with the full council. Jin looked surprised. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do, replied. This is not who we should be. They have always prided ourselves on our logic and reason, but there is no logic in cheating. There is no reason in making others uncomfortable to gain advantage. He turned to. Your species has taught me something. Sometimes strength is admitting weakness. Before could respond, rushed into the office. You need to come to the council chamber. Now, there's been an incident. They rushed through the corridors, which were covered in construction equipment and temporary barriers. When they reached the council chamber, they found a crowd gathered outside. Was there, along with and several other delegates. In the center of the commotion was Bo. The big security officer looked distressed. Standing next to him was a worker who appeared to be in shock. What happened? Asked. Turned to him. There was an accident in the construction zone. A support beam became unstable. It would have crushed worker. He gestured to the shocked, but officer pulled him out of the way. I just reacted, Bo said, embarrassed by the attention. Anyone would have done the same. The worker was staring at Bo with wide eyes. He moved so fast, I did not even see the beam falling, but he saw it, and he pulled me away. A human saved my life. Looked at Bo with an expression had never seen on the High Chancellor's face before. It was gratitude. Officer, the Empire owes you a debt. You risked your own safety to save one of our people. Bo shuffled his feet uncomfortably. It's just part of the job, sir. No, said firmly. It is more than that, and I have not been fair to your species, to any of you. He looked then at the crowd of humans and other species gathered around. I have been angry since the day you arrived, angry that you disrupted our systems, angry that you forced us to change, but you were right to cause that disruption, and we were wrong to resist it. The crowd was silent. A High Chancellor admitting fault was almost unheard of. They have ruled this station as if it belonged to us alone, continued. But it belongs to all species of the Council, and I have decided to release historical documents that will prove the environmental design was intentionally biased in our favor. This was wrong, and I apologize. Stepped forward. High Chancellor, that takes courage. It takes honesty, corrected. Something I should have embraced from the beginning. He paused, then added, and I have a proposal. When the retrofit is complete, I would like to hold a ceremony, a dedication of the new systems. I would like Delegate to speak at that ceremony, to remind us all why we are making these changes. I would be honored, said. Approached them. High Chancellor, I have been working with the human engineering team. I believe I can help coordinate the final phases of construction, if you approve. Looked at the young delegate. You have been vocal about our need for change. Some in our government see this as betrayal. With respect, High Chancellor, said, the real betrayal would be pretending everything was fine. The real betrayal would be maintaining systems we know are unfair just because they benefit us. Considered this. Then to everyone's surprise he smiled slightly. It was a small smile barely visible on his reptilian features, but it was there. You remind me of myself when I was young, before politics made me cautious. Very well, delegate, you will work with the construction teams, and perhaps you will help to find a better path forward. Over the next 3 months, the work continued. Jin and became an unlikely but effective team, proved to be an excellent coordinator, bridging the gap between traditionalists and the reform movement. Bo became something of a hero on the station after saving, and he used his newfound influence to advocate for better safety protocols. Found himself working more closely with. The High Chancellor was changing. The anger that had defined him early on was being replaced by something else. Wisdom, maybe, or humility. They had long conversations about governance, about inclusion, about the future of the council. "You humans are chaos," told him once, late at night in the observation deck. "You arrive and everything becomes complicated, but perhaps we needed that chaos. We had become too comfortable, too certain that our way was the only way." "Change is hard," said, "especially when you've been in power for so long." "The hardest part," admitted, "is realizing that power maintained through the discomfort of others is not real power. It is just exploitation dressed up as tradition." Dr. Sun Yang published her research on comparative biology across council species. It became required reading for all new delegates. Her work showed that biodiversity was not just a fact to be managed, but a strength to be celebrated. Different species saw problems differently, solved challenges differently, and a council that respected those differences was stronger than one that demanded conformity. Organized cultural exchange programs. Human delegates ate lunch with philosophers. Engineers played strategy games with scientists. Slowly, the species that had been isolated from each other began to connect. As the 6-month deadline approached, the station was transformed. Each section now had its own climate control. The sections were warm and comfortable. They had perfectly heated water. Even the rock-like had specialized cooling areas, and the sections remained cool and comfortable for cold-blooded biology. The council chamber itself was redesigned. Each delegate's section could be set to their preferred temperature. Invisible thermal barriers kept the temperatures separated. Could sit next to each in their own comfort zone without affecting each other. The day before the dedication ceremony, stood in the council chamber with Jin and they looked at the new seat designs. Each one was adjustable, comfortable, and most importantly, safe. "Well," said to Jin, "think I can sit down without causing a disaster this time?" Jin laughed. "The new systems have multiple safety protocols. Even if something goes wrong, the worst that happens is your seat gets a little warm." "Not hot enough to cook an egg," joked. "Not unless you're really trying," Jin confirmed. Examine the systems one final time. These are good designs, efficient, elegant. I admit, working with humans has expanded my understanding of what engineering can be. "You've taught us a lot too," Jin said. "Precision and efficiency combined with human adaptability. That's a good combination." Looked at him with those sharp eyes. "Perhaps we are not so different, your species and mine. We both value logic. We both seek solutions. We simply had to learn to work together." "And all it took was one overheated chair," said. They all laughed, even though his laughter sounded like a series of sharp hisses. Tomorrow would be the ceremony. Tomorrow, the station would officially enter a new era. But tonight, 3 individuals from different worlds stood together in the council chamber and appreciated what they had built. Not just a climate control system, but a foundation for true cooperation. And it had all started because one human had been too warm for a chair. 6 months had passed since first sat in that chair. The day of the dedication ceremony arrived with clear artificial sunlight streaming through the station's viewports. Outside, stars stretched endlessly in all directions, a reminder of how vast the galaxy was and how small any one species was in comparison. Stood in front of a mirror in his quarters, adjusting his formal suit. This one was different from the one he wore that first day. He had learned a lot since then. He had learned about climate control, about galactic politics, about how change happens not through grand declarations but through small, persistent actions. Entered without knocking, they were past such formalities now, ready for your big speech. Nervous, admitted, what if I say the wrong thing? Then you'll be human, said with a smile. Just like when you sat in that chair, you didn't plan to cause a revolution, but you did, because you were authentically yourself. They walked together through the newly renovated corridors. The difference was immediately noticeable. The hallways no longer felt uniformly cold. Instead, there were gentle transitions between climate zones, marked by subtle color coding on the walls. Blue zones were cool. Red zones were warm. Green zones were the moderate middle ground where most species felt comfortable. As they passed through different zones, noticed other changes too. The station felt more alive. Delegates from different species chatted in the corridors. A group of and humans were laughing together near a food dispensary. An engineer was patiently explaining something to a young technician. The council chamber had been transformed. The massive space now felt welcoming rather than intimidating. Each delegate section was clearly marked with climate indicators. The seats had been replaced with simpler, more comfortable chairs that didn't try to regulate anyone's temperature. The gallery was packed. It seemed like everyone on the station had come to watch the ceremony. Spotted Jin sitting with and a whole team of engineers, both human and. Bo was there in his security uniform, sitting next to the worker he had saved. Dr. Sun Yang was in the science section, surrounded by colleagues from multiple species. High Chancellor stood at the center of the chamber. He looked different too, more relaxed. His scales seemed brighter, more vibrant. Next to him stood, who had been promoted to a senior advisory position. The young had become a bridge between the old guard and the new generation. His voice echoed through the chamber. Distinguished delegates, honored guests, and friends, we gather today to mark the completion of the Galactic Council Station's thermal reformation. This project has been the most extensive renovation in our station's history, and it represents something more important than new equipment or updated systems. It represents a fundamental shift in how we view each other. He paused, looking around the chamber at all the different species. 6 months ago, a human sat in a chair, and that simple act exposed 3 centuries of unfairness that we had chosen not to see. We had built this station to advantage one species at the expense of all others. We told ourselves this was tradition, that it was efficient, that others had adapted. But adaptation forced by discomfort is not adaptation. It is oppression wearing a polite face. The chamber was completely silent. Many in the audience looked uncomfortable, but they listened. I have released the historical documents, continued. Everyone can now read how deliberately we designed systems to give ourselves advantages in negotiations. This was wrong, and on behalf of the Empire, I formally apologize to every species who suffered under these conditions. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with the delegation and spread throughout the chamber. Even some were clapping, though others looked conflicted. But apology is only the beginning, said. Real change requires action, and so we have rebuilt our station, not as a station that tolerates others, but as a truly galactic station that welcomes everyone. Each species can now work in comfort, and in that comfort we can finally be equals. He gestured too. I would like to invite human delegate to speak. 6 months ago, he was simply a diplomat trying to do his job. Today, he is a symbol of how small actions can create profound change. Walked to the center of the chamber. His heart was pounding, but he kept his voice steady. Thank you, High Chancellor. When I sat in that chair 6 months ago, I was just trying not to embarrass humanity on our first day at the council. Instead, I overheated the entire chamber and nearly caused an international incident. There were chuckles throughout the audience. But that embarrassing moment led to important conversations. It revealed problems that needed to be addressed, and it brought us all together to find solutions. Looked at the faces in the crowd, so many different species all watching him. I want to tell you what I've learned in these 6 months. I learned that change is uncomfortable. High Chancellor had to admit his people had done wrong. Engineer had to accept that design wasn't perfect. Delegate had to risk his career to speak uncomfortable truths. And my own species had to accept that our very presence was disruptive to systems that had worked for centuries. He paused. But I also learned that discomfort can be good. It forces us to examine things we've taken for granted. It makes us question whether this is how we've always done it is really a good enough reason to keep doing something. And most importantly, it reminds us that our comfort should never come at the cost of someone else's suffering. Gestured to the renovated chamber. These climate controls are not just about temperature, they are about respect. They say that every species matters equally, that delegates deserve to be warm, that delegates deserve to be cool, that humans deserve not to freeze, and that all of us deserve to work together without anyone having an unfair advantage. He looked directly at, High Chancellor, you asked me to speak today as a symbol, but I'm not the real symbol here. You are, because you had the courage to admit fault, to release those documents, to apologize publicly. That takes more strength than maintaining power through manipulation. That takes real leadership. Inclined his head slightly, accepting the compliment. 6 months ago, continued, I was embarrassed. I thought I had ruined humanity's chance at the council. But now I understand that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply be ourselves. I sat in a chair with my normal human body temperature. That one authentic act exposed a systemic problem. And in exposing that problem, we made things better for everyone. Smiled at the crowd. So to any species who might join this council in the future, I offer this advice. Don't try to fit into systems that weren't made for you. Be authentically yourself. Yes, it might break a few things. Yes, it might be uncomfortable for those who benefit from the current system. But your authenticity might be exactly what the galaxy needs to grow and improve. The applause was thunderous. Every species in the chamber was clapping. Even the old conservative who had objected to everything was nodding with grudging respect. After the ceremony, they held a reception in one of the new multi-climate social halls. Different sections of the room were maintained at different temperatures, allowing everyone to mingle comfortably. Approached with Jin, the two engineers looked pleased with themselves. The systems are performing at 103% efficiency, announced, better than projected. Because we combined precision with human creativity, Jin added. Neither of us could have built this alone. Together, we built something better than either of us imagined. Joined them with following. The High Chancellor held a drink in one clawed hand. Delegate, that was an excellent speech. Thank you, High Chancellor, but I meant what I said. You're the real hero of this story. No, said quietly. I am simply someone who finally did what should have been done centuries ago, but I appreciate your generosity. He looked at. This young one, however, will be the true leader of tomorrow. He has already proposed several reforms beyond just climate control. Looked embarrassed but determined. The climate issue revealed many other inequities in council systems. Food services, sleeping quarters, recreational facilities. All were optimized for. We have much work to do. And you'll help him? Asked. I will, confirmed. They have had enough time ruling. Perhaps it is time we learn to cooperate instead. Bo walked past, deep in conversation with about security protocols. They were designing new safety procedures together, combining human quick reflexes with systematic thinking. Dr. Sun Yang was presenting her research to a mixed group of scientists. They were planning an ambitious study of multi-species cooperation patterns. How did different biologies lead to different problem-solving approaches? How could the council harness that diversity? Appeared its elbow. There's a memorial being installed tomorrow. They want you there. A memorial. "For the chair," she said with a grin. "The original one that started everything. They're putting it in the station museum with a plaque." Laughed, "What will the plaque say?" "Here began the thermal reformation," quoted. "One small seat for a human, one giant embarrassment for—" Everyone in the group laughed, even End. "That is actually quite clever," admitted. Later that evening, stood in the observation deck looking out at the stars. The station was quiet now, the celebrations winding down. He thought about everything that had happened. How a simple mistake had led to profound change. How being himself had been enough to start a revolution. Joined him at the viewport. "What are you thinking about?" "About how strange it all is," said. "We came here expecting to adapt to the galactic community. Instead, we accidentally changed it." "You did not change it," corrected. "You revealed what needed changing. There is a difference. The problems were always there. You simply made them impossible to ignore." "And now?" "Now we build something better," said. "Not a dominated council, not a human-dominated council, but a truly cooperative council where every voice matters equally, where philosophers and engineers and human diplomats and scientists all contribute their unique perspectives." "That sounds nice," said. "It sounds difficult," replied, "but worthwhile things usually are." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars. "Delegate," said finally, "thank you for sitting in that chair." Smiled, "Thank you for having the courage to speak the truth about it." The next day, they installed the memorial. The original chair was placed in a place of honor in the station museum. The plaque was exactly as had described. Visitors from across the galaxy would come to see it, this ordinary chair that had sparked extraordinary change. Years later, when other species joined the Galactic Council, they would hear the story of the chair. The story of how one human's embarrassing first day had become a turning point in galactic history. The story of how admitting fault could be stronger than defending tradition. The story of how diversity, properly respected, made everyone stronger. But on that day, as stood looking at the chair in its museum case, he thought about something simpler. He thought about how every great change starts with a small action, how authenticity can be revolutionary, and how sometimes the most important thing you can do is just be yourself, even if it breaks a few things along the way. Because in the end, the things that break were probably already broken. They were just waiting for someone warm enough, brave enough, and honest enough to reveal it. And once revealed, they could finally be fixed. The thermal reformation had succeeded, but more importantly, it had shown the galaxy a new way forward. A way based not on domination or forced adaptation, but on mutual respect and genuine inclusion. One small seat for a human, one giant leap for galactic civilization. And it had all started because sat down and was simply, authentically warm.